Hey guys, what's up? My name is Blaze and welcome to part 4 of our ongoing action RPG tutorial series, which we're making here in GameMaker Studio 2. Now, if you haven't watched the last video that I made, which was the kind of the preview video for this one, I suggest you go back and watch it because I'm going to keep my explanations to a minimum. That's because I want to take these theory and practice sections of the tutorial series and kind of divide them up so that the videos are more focused on the task at hand rather than me going off and explaining things separately. So I suggest that in the future anyway, that you go back and you watch the theory videos if you just get confused with watching this, because I just want to skip all those explanations. So let's see what we have at the moment here. What we're going to do today is we're going to take our game, we're going to clean it up, and essentially we're going to finalize the foundations of the game, the absolute basics. So we're actually going to be setting up our state machine. So let's look at what we have first. Okay, there are a few other fixes that we're going to make. This is one of them. So at the moment we have this so far. We have our character that can move left to right, up and down, which is great. And we have like simple, very simple collisions. So the first thing that we're going to do is actually fix that collision there. That's one of the things that we're going to do. But also, if you look closely here, facing the down position, we can see that our right arm is purple and our left arm is red. All right, going up is the same deal. But I'm going with Video 3B, where instead of using two separate sprites to basically say left and right, I essentially just flip the image. Now, if you look here, if I'm moving left and then I press down or up on my keyboard, you can see that I am now basically flipped. The legs colors are flipped and the arm colors are flipped. So that's another thing that we're going to fix today. These are just really minor fixes for now. They're not really game breaking. I mean, at the end of the day, unless your sprite has asymmetrical components to it, for example, I don't know, maybe your character has a sword on their back or something like that, or they have a unique pose when they're standing still. Unless those are the cases, then you don't really need to be concerned about whether the image gets flipped or not. It just matters when you start having asymmetrics in your game. So the first thing that I actually noticed was when we were facing down, we had like a bunch of sprites here that didn't, pixels here that didn't get deleted when we imported them. So let's get rid of those because we don't need them. They shouldn't be there in the first place. And we're just going to go to Edit Image, and using the wand tool, you can actually select a block of color and just get rid of that completely. So those are the minor sprite fixes that we're going to do today. We're also going to start implementing different animations, but let's take things one step at a time. The first thing that we're going to do is actually fix that weird image flip that was happening before. So essentially what I have here is if x-axis is not equal to 0, depending on if we're pressing left or right, we are going to flip the image. But that only happens if our x-axis is greater than 0. So what we're going to do actually is there's more than one way to do this, but I'm just basically going to take this code and apply it here in the y-axis section. So let's make a check. If y-axis, remember to keep your spelling in check, is not 0, then we are going to do some stuff. We're going to do stuff. And I like to indent my if statements if they're inside another if statement. It makes things easier to read. And I like to have my braces on their own separate line. That's just a personal preference of mine. But basically here what we want to do is ensure that the image X scale, so which direction we're facing, is always going to be 1, regardless of whether or not we were facing left or right before we started moving up or down. So now if we play the game, we should have, okay, we still have the left and right movement. That shouldn't have changed. But now, even if I'm moving left, the red arm is always going to be on the left side, and the purple arm will always be on the right side. Again, this only matters if your sprites or your characters have asymmetrical details. If not, then you don't really have to have this. But seeing as I need to cover as many bases as possible, this is the option that I'm going with. So let's move on with the next section. What we're going to do now is actually we're going to clean up this step event. By the end of this video, this step event will have only 2 lines of code in it, where all of this code will be put somewhere else. So the first thing that we're actually going to do is have a look here at our actions. All right, so we have idle, and what we need to do now is actually add in some extra entries here for our 2D array here. So we need horizontal, and we're going to add a new action in. So go into your macros, and in the action section, we'll go macro, and give your macro a name. Basically, this macro will control our movement. So let's just say move, and we'll set that to 1. That's all you need to do for now. So we're done with the macros at this point, at least for this video. And in horizontal, we're going to say, not macro, we're going to say move is going to be basically, if we're moving left or right, I'm going to use view player walk side. It's quite a long name, but that's what I decided on. And then again, we're going to do that for the up view, up and move. And we're going to set that to view player walk up. And again, of course, we need to make one for down as well. View down and move is view player walk down. Cool, awesome. So these are the changes, the only changes that we need to make for now. There's going to be one more change here in the create event. So we've just added those extra entries for our 2D array. Let me put some space between them so that you can read them a little bit easier. Cool, that's done, but there's no way that we can actually activate the move action just yet. What we first need to do is say, well, actually there's more than one way to do this, but I'll keep it neat. Yeah, I'll keep it neat. We're going to create a script, and I'm going to call this script get input. Doesn't really matter what the actual script name is, as long as you know what it does, then that's, acceptable. So what we're basically going to do here is get user input, and I'll just put that comment in. Get user input. For now, we're just going to have movement, of course, and in our step event for our player, we're going to take that code for our keyboard inputs, our x-axis and y-axis, and we're going to delete that. And then down here, in the get user input section, we're going to paste that. I don't recommend you guys copy and pasting, just because a lot of things can go wrong when you're copying and pasting. But in this case, because we are just setting things up for the future videos and for the rest of the project, it's okay. We're really just moving things around. It's when you start copying code from other scripts or from other people that things kind of get very, very complicated. So that's what we have now, and that's all that we need at this point. So that's done. And then what we need to do now is take all of this movement code, and we actually need to put that into its own script as well. So what we're doing now is we're setting up scripts for states. So I'm going to create a script. I'm going to call mine state, and I will call mine idle, even though it will have more than just the idle sequence in it. So let's take all of this movement code, grab all of that, every single line, essentially, and we're going to cut that out, and we're going to paste it down here in the script, in the state idle script. And that's pretty much all for now. Let's just leave it. Let's have a look at what we have left here. We basically only have the sprite index script that we're going to be using to control our sprites. So down here in state idle, what we actually need to do are make some changes to how or which script is actually going to be running. or which sprite is going to be running at this point. So here in state idle, what we need to do is say if x-axis is not equal to 0, we need to change our action. Action equals move. Whoops, wrong one. Move. And down here as well, we need to say action equals move. Okay, I'm kind of thinking if I should just keep these action points, these lines here, these two lines of code should be here. I'm just thinking which one would be better for you guys, so just give me a sec. Okay, you know what? Let's do it this way. Alright, we'll write a new if statement. If x-axis is not equal to 0, or, that's what those two straight lines are for, or if y-axis, and this should work, is not equal to 0, then action is move. Else, so if it is 0, if any one of those is 0, else action equals idle. So what I've essentially done is cut down the number of lines of code that we have to write. Because if I have the action equals move over in these two sections, I still have to make another check for whether it's in idle or not. I still have to put that in. So basically what I've done here is I've cut down the lines of code that I needed. And if another thing that I want to point out, this is kind of incidental teaching, but another thing that I want you guys to be aware of is if you have an if or else statement and you only have one line of code that you're running, you don't have to have these curly braces in. That's what they're called, curly braces. But nothing's going to happen because we're not calling this code. And so what we need to do is actually save that line, that code first, and then we need to go up here into the create event, and then we need to add a new variable in, and we're going to call it state. And the state that we start in, basically, is going to be state idle. Don't put the brackets in. Don't write that because that will call it. What we need to do is we need to set it. If you are using a language that's not GML, I shouldn't be talking about this, but because it's got nothing to do with the tutorial, but it would be different if you're using a different programming language. But we're using GameMaker, so this is fine. And then here in step, what we're going to do is say execute. I think it's script execute, actually. Script, yeah, there it is. Script execute. And basically what we're going to do is say state. Awesome. Done. Now, seeing as this is the only state that we will be using at this point, it's fine if you just put that in there. Let's try running the code and see what happens. I have deliberately left a line of code out. And if I press all the keys, nothing happens. That's because even though we're calling this script here, state idle, we're not actually getting any input because what we need to do is say get input and put the brackets in. Whoops, we don't need that L there. So basically what we're doing is we're saying whenever we're in state idle, we need to call the script get input. We need to check for input. And then if we are, well, if we're pressing up, down, left, or right, then we play the animated sprite here. If we're not pressing any of those, and I'm pretty sure this will work, we're basically going to say, well, since we're not pressing anything, go back to idle. So let's try and see what happens. Let's just let that compile. And there we go. We have some movement, left and right, up and down. And you can see here that the red arm is always going to be on the left and the purple arm is always going to be on the right. Now, I was thinking of creating a tutorial for animating your sprites, but I'm not that great a sprite animator, as I found out. I'm not that good. And so what I'm going to do is I'll probably put that in a little bit later because it's not quite important yet. In fact, you can make this entire section, you can actually use just using your basic colliders and basic, super basic sprites. It wouldn't matter. I mean, some people make games like that, so that's really not a cause for concern, but it's an option. It's an option for you guys. Okay, so what we're going to look at now is, well, let's summarize. Let's summarize what we've done so far. We started here in the create event. We made 3 new entries, basically for our moving sprites, and we created a new variable that will hold our player's state, so what they are doing. In the step event, we took out all of that code that we wrote and we put them into 2 new scripts. One is for getting user input, so things like pressing keys on the keyboard, mouse clicks, etc., etc. But we're not going to cover that yet. We're just here in the movement area. And then we created a, let me just close that. We then created a state, our first state for our state machine. And basically this state holds our idle and our move states. But we've decided to call it state idle, even though it does 2 things. But that doesn't matter. Generally speaking, when you are moving or if you're idle, they generally get put into the same category. So it doesn't really matter where you put the move or idle. They can be separate, but it's completely up to you design-wise. But for simplicity's sake, I've put move and idle into the same thing. So what are we doing here in state idle? The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to check for input. And basically, if we're pressing any of our movement keys, we're going to play the move sprite. Otherwise, we're just going to play the idle sprite. Now, a question that came up recently, because I'm teaching something like this in another class. We're not using GameMaker, we're using something else. But why would I have 2 different sprites for for moving and for idle? Well, here's the thing. If you're working in 3D, generally you have an animated sprite. Or if you're working with larger sprites, you would have an animated idle sprite. The idea here is to present a project for you guys to be able to extend upon it. So even though my idle sprite is just 1 frame, I mean, you can have like a massive sprite, like what's a Ragnarok size sprite is about 96 pixels high. You can have that whole sprite there, you know, animated and doing stuff, maybe scratching their head or shaking their hips or something. I don't know, like you might have a weird animation sprite, animated sprite for your idle. What we're doing here is I'm just giving you a basic outline, but you can totally expand upon it. It's extensible and it will work with whatever modifications you make. But going on, we have our code that we wrote in the first video that just gets slapped on here. We're going to do a little bit of more cleanup a little bit later in the series where we actually put these collisions somewhere else, these movement and collisions in another script, but we won't do that for now. And then finally, with that state idle, since we have stored it into an actual variable, we can call the script execute and state. And then of course, here we have the line where we indicate which sprite we want to play. And all it does is it plays the right sprite at the right time. Keep in mind that we do have different actions for idle and move. All right, so that's just something that you guys need to take into account. So that's it. We have prepared our project for basically the rest of the series. The rest of the series is going to be based on this setup here. So stick around for that. That was it. That was really all that I wanted to do for this video. And I am very busy lately. I'll be moving to a new city again very soon. So there may be some interruptions in my upload schedule. But don't worry, things are still going to continue even though I've moved. The video quality will probably go down because I'm not using my desktop. So please do bear with me in that. Don't worry, the actual teaching and what you guys will learn will still be the same quality. It's just the video probably won't be the same quality. So that's all for me, guys. I hope that you've learned something today about using states and implementing them into your action RPG. If you have questions, questions, or if you found something a little bit confusing, don't be afraid to ask, because I'm always here to answer your questions. Anyway, guys, that's all from me. The next video, we will be implementing some bad guys and some room transitions. So there you go. Those are the next 2 videos, actually, coming up very soon. But for now, that's all from me. I'll see you all later. Bye.